Thursday, May 14th, and today I'll be reading Glory Be chapters 22 and 23. Altogether, it is 8 full pages, so it won't be too long of a video today. Today's objective: students will be able to identify secondary characters and notice that they often teach the main character something. Your DOL: students will create a tree map to track what the secondary character says and does to teach the main character a lesson. And that's what a tree map looks like. The secondary character goes on the top, and then you write what the secondary character is thinking, what they're doing, and what they're saying. Yesterday, we learned how to make inferences while reading a text. Today, I want to teach you that readers know that secondary characters often teach the main character lessons. Here are some steps that you can use to help identify when the main character learns from a secondary character. Step 1. Reread the passage tracking where the secondary character interacts with the main character. Step 2. Notice what the secondary character thinks, does, and says about the interaction. Step 3. Ask yourself, what does this interaction impact the main character and teaches them a lesson? Chapter 22, A Heap of Trouble. If you don't want to listen to me read it, feel free to pause each page and read it yourself. Chapter 22, A Heap of Trouble. When I got home, I could smell Emma's pie baking. I tried to sneak back into the kitchen, but there was no getting around her. Don't you ever disobey me like that again. Emma was holding a pie server. I'm sorry, I just wanted to. She pointed the server at me. Sorry's not enough. You're my responsibility when your father's away. I have a good mind to put the server to your backside. Emma never spanked me, but oh, did she look mad now. I felt my feet ease away from her. She said, Yes, that's right. Take a step back, Lori. Step back in your thinking, too. Pause before you act, child. The sun rises slowly over hanging moss, and so should you. I nodded to show her I understood. Go, wash your hands for supper, she said softly. At the supper table, all of us ate quietly. I was working out how to prove Frankie was wrong about Laura. Daddy was probably thinking about preaching to the shut-ins he'd be visiting tomorrow, and Jesslyn was for sure swooning over Robbie. After we each ate a big wedge of peach pie, we headed for the front porch. Jesslyn and I pushed back and forth on the porch swing with our bare feet. Emma waited inside for her Liberty taxi ride home. When her friend pulled up, I called out, Hey, Mr. Miles, Emma will be there in a minute. I stood up just when Emma stepped on the porch, and I noticed something I'd never seen before. 2 little colored kids sat in the back seat of the taxi, a boy and a girl, younger than me. When the girl's eyes met mine, she looked like she wanted to wave at me, but stopped her hand before she let the wave rise up to where the open window let in the night's summer heat. Our daddy sat off to one side of the porch holding his newspaper under the light. I leaned over to read the open page. Is my letter to the editor in there today? All I saw was an ad for eggs, priced at 40 cents a dozen, and an announcement that somebody was giving away kittens for free. Daddy shook his head. Mrs. Simpson has a lot to say about what gets in the paper and what doesn't. He turned the page. You did a good thing, Glory. Anything about the community pool? Frankie says the Freedom Workers broke in and messed up the lockers and stole things. I saw a policeman there this afternoon, Jesslyn said. What'd you hear, Glory? I glanced up just as Emma started down the steps. Before I could answer my sister, Emma stopped real quick and took a step back onto the porch. A white car pulled up in front of our house. Out came Mr. Smith. Frankie was in the back seat. He didn't get out. He didn't even wave. Howdy, Reverend. Mr. Smith touched his hat, tipped it toward our daddy. He nodded at me and Jesslyn. He looked right through Emma like she wasn't even there. May I have a word? He asked Daddy. As preacher's kids, Jesslyn and I know that when a member of the church shows up on our front porch, especially when the member is a deacon like Mr. Smith, we're supposed to give Daddy some privacy. Emma, standing with her summer straw hat set just so, and her pocketbook under her arm ready to go home in Mr. Miles's taxi, knew what she was supposed to do too. All 3 of us stepped inside the front screen door. Daddy spoke first. What's on your mind, James? Even though we left the porch, we could hear every word between the 2 men and could see them talking. It's about Glory, Mr. Smith answered. What about my daughter? I sucked in my breath and held it. You realize she's been keeping bad company, socializing with that Yankee gal over at the library, Mr. Smith said. I heard tell Glory wrote a letter to the editor of the paper about the pool closing. Your daughter was probably unduly influenced by the girl from up north. Frankie thinks Glory knows where she's staying at. Daddy didn't answer right off. Emma leaned closer to the door. Even without the front hall light turned on, I saw her jaw clenching and a frown taking over her face. We're trying to get word to that girl's mama about vandalism that occurred at the pool. Mr. Smith took a step closer. He was about a foot taller than my daddy, so Daddy had to look up at him. Somebody broke into the pool last evening late, messed up the lockers, and stole candy bars. Mr. Smith's voice got louder, near about made me want to cover up my ears. We suspect it was the girl from the library. Daddy was stretching his neck, holding his head up higher to look as tall as Mr. Smith. I'm speaking for the pool committee, Frankie's dad went on, but there's also people in the church who agree that Glory's being friends with these outside agitators. Why, she's sticking her nose in where it don't belong. By now, Daddy looked to be as tall as Frankie's daddy. Maybe it was the sure way he was speaking. Well now, James, truth to tell, I'm right proud of Glory. She's standing up for what she believes is right. All of us should lead our children to do that, don't you know? What I know is that we can't have these freedom people damaging town property. We need to stand up for these things the way they've always been. Mr. Smith's bald head glowed under the front porch light. His eyes looked meaner than a snake's. Jocelyn grabbed my hand in the dark front hall. She held it so hard I thought my fingers might break off. I shivered. Emma reached over and squeezed my shoulder, then hugged me close. For a minute, all I could hear was her whispering, Lord, Lord, over and over like she was praying to herself. I leaned into her and listened to my daddy and Mr. Smith start up again. I was getting madder at every word Frankie's dad said, but I was proud of my daddy for sticking up for me and Laura. I don't believe Laura did what you're accusing her of, Daddy said. She's visited in our home, and she is a sweet, well-behaved, polite child. She's a friend of Glory's. That's enough for me. That's so? Well, she was up to no good last night, I tell you, Mr. Smith answered. They found a black sock at the scene. My boys tell me she's the only person who wears those socks. She's lucky the police won't press charges, this time anyway. But her mama, that civil rights worker, Mr. Smith pronounced civil rights like it was a bad taste he needed to spit out of his mouth. She needs to know what her daughter is up to. I couldn't wait one more minute in the dark listening to Mr. Smith. I knew I shouldn't talk back to a grown-up standing on our front porch, but that was my friend he was talking about, and this was my pool, and 3 days before my birthday. I pulled away from Jocelyn and Emma and then stormed onto the porch, looked hard at Frankie's daddy. Everything, including the lightning bugs, seemed to hold still for a minute, waiting for me. I let out a hard breath. You're wrong, Mr. Smith. Laura Lampert's my friend. She wouldn't do that. You're just plain wrong. Justin opened the door and stood close to me on the porch. Emma pushed by Mr. Smith and stopped at the bottom of the steps. She kept her eyes on her friend driving the taxicab. There's more to stories than it seems at first looking, she said. 2 sides to most stories. Folks better be thinking about that for once. And Emma kept on walking without another word, except to call out into the evening darkness. Good night, Brother Joe, Jocelyn, Glory. See you all in the morning. Mr. Smith shook his head and squeezed his eyes shut real tight. You'd best be leaving, James, Daddy said. When the light came on in the car, Frankie was slinking down so low in the back seat I couldn't hardly see him. Daddy held me and Jocelyn tight. You did right, Glory, he whispered. I didn't like the look Mr. Smith had when he stomped off our porch. There was a heap of hate swirling around Frankie's daddy. Okay, so I will be doing a teacher model about chapter 22 before reading chapter 23. Watch as I use a tree map to determine how a secondary character teaches the main character a lesson. On page 141, I can see that Glory is interacting with Emma in the kitchen. And step 2, notice what the secondary character thinks, does, and says about the interaction. Now I'm going to track what Emma thinks, says, and does that leads Glory to learn something from her. So, the secondary character is Emma, and Emma thinks she should spank Glory for disobeying her. Emma points the server at Glory. That's something that she did in chapter 22. She said to Glory, step back in your thinking too. Pause before you act, child. The sun rises slowly over hanging moss, and so should you. The last step, ask yourself, how does this interaction impact the main character and teaches them a lesson? Glory nodded to show Emma that she understood. She understands that she has to move slowly if she wants change to happen because Hanging Moss is a slow town. She can't force them to change too quickly or she might cause problems for herself. Your independent work is from chapter 23, and you're going to focus on Miss Bloom and her interactions with Glory. So I'll read that, and like I said, if you'd like to read it yourself, you have your own digital copies, or you can just pause my video. Chapter 23, For Dang Sure. I needed to find Laura. The next morning I crept downstairs before the sun peeked over the tall zinnias blooming along our back fence. I'm at the library was all I wrote for Emma on my note. Pretty soon I headed straight down Church Street. When Miss Bloom opened the library's back door, Laura stood next to her. Glory, you're up with the chickens. Did you hear, Miss B? Something bad happened at the pool, I said. Laura had a big stack of books hugged tight and a worried look on her face. They're blaming it on you, I told her. Frankie's daddy came to my house last night. We know about the incident, Miss Bloom said. She took off her glasses, put her arm around Laura. Laura had nothing to do with it. Everything's fine. That's not what Mr. Smith said. I stuffed my hand in my pocket of my shorts. He scared me. I told him you didn't do anything. My daddy stuck up for me, too. You and your father are right, Laura finally said. I didn't break into your pool. Your friend Frankie and his father are wrong. Miss Bloom said, Mr. Smith's just stirring up some trouble. Laura was with me that night someone vandalized the pool. She and her mother and I were having supper together. I told the police that, and they were here yesterday evening. Laura looked down at her stack of books, then back at me. I'm going back to Ohio to stay with my grandparents. They're worried. They've heard bad things might happen here. Miss Bloom patted Laura's shoulder. But you're here for July 4th, and we're planning something special at the library next week. Right, Laura? A thank you for everyone who helps with the July 4th parade, Miss B said. Miss Bloom says we'll help with that, Laura said to me. Something special indeed. This is an important week for hanging moss. Miss Bloom's eyes squinched up, and a huge smile broke out. The parade, fireworks, and a big to-do at the library. Won't that be fun, girls? Laura bit her lip like she was deciding about that. The library party sounds like fun. I'm not sure about July 4th, I said under my breath. Miss Bloom touched my hand, then looked back at Laura. You'll enjoy the parade, all the floats. Bands are coming from all around. There will be beautiful fireworks after dark. We'll all go together. You'll be fine with me, dear. Yeah, and on the 4th of July, day after tomorrow, was also my birthday. Nobody cared about that. That's for dang sure. I don't know, Miss B. The pool closing, Frankie accusing Laura of something she didn't do, Mr. Smith yelling at my daddy. I shivered in the air-conditioned library office. I hoped this parade would have the best ever floats and bands, but the way things were going so far this summer, I didn't want to think about what else bad might happen. I've never been to a parade, Laura said. It might be fun. I bet Laura won't think sitting on a scratchy grass in the summer heat with a bunch of strangers singing and waving little flags is as much fun as spending her summer fighting shells at the beach like her mama had promised her. But Miss Bloom smiled again, like all this celebrating was getting better and better. So just as I did with my teacher model, you will be filling out a tree map that looks like the one at the bottom of this slide about Miss Bloom interacting with Glory. So you're going to think, what does Miss Bloom think, do, and say in chapter 23 that might help Glory learn a lesson? Okay, I hope everyone has a great Thursday.